Good morning. Good morning. It is so good to be with you. My name is Reverend Christopher Rowe. I serve as the senior minister here at Fountain Street Church, a place where love and justice and inclusion and peacemaking are the shared works of our liberated and liberating faith. And on behalf of everyone who calls this beautiful place their spiritual home, please let me welcome you here this morning. Today marks the end of the church program year, which is a little bit more idiosyncratic than other years. Typically, we end things like the choir and the character school and all of the other learning programs on the same Sunday, but we've got a little bit of overlap this year, and so it is in fact not the last Sunday that the choir will be with us. But it is the last Sunday of our family programs and our children's programs and youth programs. And so this morning's service comes to you as a bit of a retrospective, if you will, in which we go back to the first Sunday of the church year, September 11th, 2022. And we imagine where we were at that time, and we also put ourselves where we imagine we want ourselves to be in the future. So the liturgies this morning, Some of the hymns and even the choral repertoire comes to us from September 11th, 2022, though with some new variations and compositional efforts behind them. And it will be a time of reflection and rejoicing as we look into our shared future with one another. It is indeed good to be with each and every one of you. As we move into this time of worship with one another, I invite you to hear this invitation to worship brought to us from Jan Richardson's poem, Blessing in the Chaos. Hear these words as they invite us into this space of shared worship with one another today. To all that is chaotic within you, let there come silence. Let there be a calming of the clamoring, a stilling of the voices that have laid their claim upon you, that have made their home inside you, that go with you even into holy places like these. Those voices and those noises that will not let you rest, will not let you hear your life with its wholeness or feel the grace that has once fashioned you in love. Let what distracts you cease. Let what divides you cease. Let there come an end to what diminishes and demeans, and let depart all that keeps you within its cage. Let there be an opening into the quiet that lies beyond the chaos, where you find the peace you did not imagine was even possible, and you see what can shimmer even within the storm. Welcome to worship. Welcome to Fountain Street Church. At this time, friends, you are invited to turn to one another and greet each other with the peace of love. You will be called back with the first hymn. Our ancient witness for us this morning comes to us from the Sufi mystic Rumi's poem, The Guest House, translated by Coleman Marks. Hear what the ancient spirit is saying to the contemporary soul this morning. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And our contemporary witness this morning comes to us from Christine McDougall's poem, Liminal. Hear what the spirit of liminality is saying to the people of this church. Liminal. On the threshold, the space between where the questions tug, and the next step is not yet formed, but it is forming. It is a place for forming, being, seeking. Urgency is forbidden here. The liminal space has its own gestation and requires patience, dreaming, and conversation, intimate, loving conversation with the self and with others to nurture maturing. The liminal space is a place of grace. You are held by its tender embrace. To struggle against it only prolongs the journey. Relax. Breathe. Sooner or later, the next page will be turned and all will be revealed to you. And the path forward, it will become evident. In its time. In its time.
Something
Happy Ascension Sunday. Happy Ascension Sunday. I'll wait for the helicopter to go by. Urban churches. Okay. I knew coming into this service that it was unlikely that many of you, if any of you, would know what Ascension Sunday meant, because Ascension Sunday is probably one of the most esoteric observances in the Christian calendar, and certainly an occasion that I doubt has been observed here at Fountain Street Church. And yet it's one of the most pointed and relevant stories for the contemporary church, including us skeptical Fountain Streeters. And it also happens to be one of my favorite Sundays. Ascension Sunday, the seventh and final Sunday in the season of Easter, historically observed exactly 40 days after Easter, but contemporarily observed roughly 40-ish days after Easter on its nearest Sunday. And as you can guess by its name, it is the official day that Christians tell the story of Jesus formally and officially zooming up into the clouds after the drama and saga of the crucifixion and resurrection. The day that they tell the story of his ascension to heaven. Now, for even the least biblically literate among us, I'm sure some of you are asking, but wait a minute, didn't Jesus resurrect way back on Easter? And that's a fair question, because the answer is yes, he did. And also no, he didn't. And sort of yes-ish, but also no-ish. As contemporary Christian critics and historical scholars, we know that the biblical stories were written by multiple authors over multiple periods of time, containing multiple agendas to serve multiple objectives. And so, like the rest of the biblical canon, there are a lot of discrepancies with the stories of Jesus' mythical ascension into heaven. In fact, the Gospels themselves aren't entirely consistent with the story, let alone that in the book of Acts, the story of Easter deviates dramatically, and it is said that Jesus actually went up into heaven 40 days after that Easter morning. 40 days. 40. You remember that magical number? The ancient number meant to symbolize and signify transition and transformation and restoration and renewal, not only for Christians, but also for Jews and Muslims. So 40 days after Easter was in fact a few days ago on Thursday. But very few contemporary Christians gather for midweek observances like this, and so the contemporary observance falls on the seventh and final Sunday of the Easter season, which is in fact today, Ascension Sunday, the observance of Jesus zooming up into the clouds in one of Reverend Christopher's favorite Christian stories. So let's get a few things straight. The ascension clearly never happened. We can let that go right now. The story defies discipline and rationale and science and reason. The world-renowned astrophysicist and astronomer Carl Sagan once said, if Jesus quite literally ascended into the sky and was able to travel at the speed of light some 2,000 years ago, he still hasn't actually left our galaxy. He still hasn't left our galaxy. He'd still be out there flying about at the speed of light in the galaxy that you and I still share this morning. Scientifically speaking, the ascension doesn't shake out, and that's because the ascension never happened. But friends, with all of the myths that you've graciously explored with me this past year, the historicity and the scientificity, I knew I couldn't say that word. I shouldn't have even bothered. The historicity of this particular story doesn't really matter, because whether or not these spiritual myths ever actually happened is never the point at all. The point and the purpose and the potential and the power of these stories is what's happening within them and what they have to teach us this morning. The power in this story is what's happening within it and in between the lines. And for me, that power is reflected in a spiritual leader and a revolutionary man, recognizing that it was time to get out of the way, so that the resurrection of society and the revolution of the world that he was trying to move and influence was not going to be held just by him or any one leader, but by the very beloved community that he had inspired. You might recall that fateful Easter sermon I preached 7 weeks ago, in which we imagined the power of Jesus' death not being met with defeat, but rather with the rebirth of a movement beyond anyone's sacred dreams or holy imaginations. And this is what we see lived out and embodied in the story of the Ascension. A story that's not about belief, but once again about belonging. A story that invites us to witness the beginning of a new movement for the people and by the people. And a story that challenges us to recognize the ways in which we might be called in our time to take ownership of our own communities and ministries that exist in our world. In a series of myths that already defied the odds when Jesus seemingly manifested miracles and incited imagination and defeated death, there is no reason to believe that the ancient writers couldn't have also imagined a reality in which Jesus just stayed along with his disciples and tended to his movement forever. If the story was truly about celestial magic and cosmic power and transcendent miracles and the power of a savior in the ancient world, the ancient writers could have left Jesus right where he was with the early church. But that's not the point. That dismisses the potential, and that would negate the power of this story, which in fact serves to remind us that the potential and the possibility of a more loving and just and more inclusive world does not rest in the hands of a leader, but rather in the hearts of the community. Hear that again with me, because that is the heart of this morning's good news. A more loving, just, and inclusive world, the very kind of world that we know could be and should be, does not rest within the hands of a leader, but rather within the hearts of the community. That's the power of this ancient myth, and that is more than enough for the collective well-being of our world to hear this morning. Yet again, this is yet another biblical story and religious text, not about belief in a leader and something that allegedly happened that defied all odds, but rather belonging in a beloved community and the potential that it had to transform our world in ways that defied all odds. The Ascension, like all of the other ancient narratives, is a story about belonging to a beloved community and the potential that it has to transform our world in ways that defy all odds. So as I mentioned earlier, this is one of those Sundays where we get to look back a bit before we look ahead. And in fact, the last program Sunday of the year is one of my favorites. I love to imagine where we were at the start of the year and then look ahead to where we're going. I think it's important to examine where things were exactly in the life of our ministries and our church, and I think it's imperative to re-examine where things stood when we began the new year of ministry back in September of 22. Think of it as a bit of a form of metacognition or schema building, as which we observe ourselves from the 30,000-foot perspective and give ourselves the opportunity to learn from our learning. So, of course, to do this kind of self-reflection work, we need to explore where exactly we were in September. And this year, this includes digging into the state of the church at that time, which, if you will recall, was right about the same time I had declined the Senior Minister Search Committee's offer to be considered as the candidate for the position that I humbly hold today. Now, for those of you with profoundly articulate memories, or perhaps some of you with post-traumatic stress disorder still from that time, and I'm looking at a few of you squirming, you might recall that on that September 11th day, in that September 11th sermon, I had told the community that I didn't think it was time to call a senior minister. I systematically and synoptically laid out the prevailing issues that I believed were obstructing the meaningful vitality and inhibiting the collective flourishing of our organization, as well as those prevailing concerns that I believe signaled that we were in no way ready to call a senior minister. From unmanaged grief to unresolved organizational baggage, I openly and honestly laid out for you the reasons why I could not authentically affirm that you should call me or anyone else at that time to be your next senior minister. One of the reasons I did, in fact, stay and why I'm standing before you this morning is because I continue to see, I did see and I continue to see an openness, or at least an opening. An openness or an opening in which, despite our historical patterns and in spite of our contemporary challenges, you continue to demonstrate to me as a congregation that you are willing to ask some difficult questions and imagine some uncertain futures in the name of a Fountain Street church that can rise up to meet the challenges and the realities that are before us in our collective future. And while I continue to believe that our church and its people have the capacity and the determination and the desire and the grit to navigate an uncertain future, there is still one dimension to our church that I believe still finds itself back there with the ancient church, a little worried about a Savior and hoping we'll be saved. And please let me remind you that we are not alone. This is a pervasive challenge, and it is as pervasive today as it was for that church 21 centuries ago. And it's also reeling through our other churches and religious organizations, institutions, political systems, and social organizations around the globe right now. If you were actually to dig back to the rest of the canon and kind of get into the heart of the ascension story, you would see story after story and dialogue after dialogue that preceded Jesus' ascension, in which the disciples were freaking out and panicking about the idea of him leaving. From how will we know what to do's to what will we do without you's, the ancient church holds up a mirror to the contemporary churches that we occupy today, desperately seeking a Savior and anxiously grasping for someone to save them. Paralyzed by an uncertain future for the spiritual way and debilitated by the idea of addressing these issues without a designated Savior. But that's not spiritual vitality, and that's not religious flourishment. In the story of the Ascension, we can imagine that Jesus knew that. To quote our own governing board chair, Amy Preston, the power of the collective whole was greater than any one individual. We can imagine that Jesus also understood that idea that the power of the collective whole was greater than any one individual. I told Amy Preston it's probably the only time she'll be quoted with Jesus in the same sentence. And Jesus embodied this conviction in the tradition of servant leadership. It meant he embodied this through servant leadership, which meant he prioritized serving the greater good and the health of beloved community rather than his own objectives, which in this myth was signified by him stepping out of the way of his own beloved community so that they could continue their work together. Servant leadership, like we see in the myth of the Ascension, or as we see lived out in servant leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, or Sojourner Truth, or Abraham Lincoln, or Nelson Mandela, or Mother Teresa, of course, Dr. King, is often a disappointing embodiment of leadership in our broader culture because it's messy, and it's uncertain, and it's even a little unsexy. It doesn't come packed with powerful proclamations and prolific platitudes. It doesn't announce itself with sweeping certainties and parades that are pompous, full of opinions. And in both the ancient world and the contemporary world we occupy, it doesn't play well or fit well with the systems and the ways in which the political, religious, and social systems have been ordered and organized. Remember that Easter story from a few weeks ago, where all the world wanted was fanfare and triumph and blaze and glory, and all we got was an unfamiliar gardener handing out the seeds of hope to us? Servant leaders are always looking at the bigger picture and the greater good, imagining what it is that needs to happen in beloved community for meaningful vitality and collective flourishing, and committing to the health of that very community so that those things can manifest and take hold, even when it means they must step back or move aside so that the needs and the hopes and the dreams and the desires of the beloved community can take priority over the leader. In the tradition of Jesus and Dr. King and Sojourner Truth and many, many others, we witness that the servant leader knows that the role is not to direct and dictate the fate and the future of a community that they have been called to serve, but rather to nourish and nurse those very things. And in that very same tradition, and within that very same myth of the Ascension, we witness that the servant leader knows that the hopes and the fate of the future are not within their own hands, but in the hearts of the community that they've been called to serve. The hope and the fate of the future is not in their hands, but in the hearts of the people that they've been called to serve. And this is the very same paradigm in which we come together this morning. Do you realize that in just a few days, it'll have been 100 days since you officially called me to be your settled senior minister? And this is truly one of the most wonderful, greatest privileges and pleasures of my life. But I would be remiss to not take this moment of self-reflection to lift up that I can see ways in which our own church still drifts close to the patterns of the ancient church. I can see the patterns in which some of you might think of me as a savior, or you might at least see me as somebody who might take us back to our glory days. I can see the patterns in which some of you might find it appealing to venerate a younger, charismatic leader in hopes that the energy and the momentum might continue to grow, and with it, our programs and our capacity. And I can see the patterns in which we might all feel more grounded and resolute with a settled senior minister at the helm who can confidently and assuredly say, things are going to be okay because I have a plan and I have power and pontifications and proclamations and a pulpit from which I get to make them. But friends, that's not the Fountain Street Church I said yes to. And I know it's not the Fountain Street Church that we have been actively nurturing and nourishing for the past year. In fact, if anything, you've got yourself a leader that's only going to hold up a mirror back towards you, back towards your church, back towards your ministry that we are sharing, back towards your beloved community that we know is about to transform our world. One of the reasons that I pursued ordination in the American Baptist churches was because of their shared belief in the ordination of all believers, better known as soul liberty. It's this illustrious and revered belief that every person in a spiritual community has been called to and ordained into a sacred purpose and a spiritual role, and that it is the settled minister's responsibility to help them discern their own potential and their own role, and likewise find places in which to employ that potential and those roles into the life of the church. Or more simply put, the role of the settled minister is to hold up a mirror. This very virtue of soul liberty and freedom of the soul is quite literally woven into the fabric of the DNA of this church and poured into the foundation of our very ministries. Our 154-year legacy is in fact built upon a foundation and a belief that each and every one of you has a clear purpose and an innate value to be brought into the possibility and the potential of this church's future. Our contemporary vision statement even says as much. We strive to be a vibrant church community that challenges individuals to craft their own spiritual journeys and engage in creative, responsive action in the world. Hear that again. We strive to be a vibrant church community that challenges individuals to craft their own spiritual journeys and engage in creative and responsive action in the world. Friends, the purpose of beloved community and similarly spiritual community and specifically liberal religious community is not to fix ourselves around one individual in pursuit of the kind of world we want to see, but rather to organize ourselves around the collective of those very individuals who believe that that very world is indeed possible. And as much as I appreciate it when you clap as a witness to your affirmation and you express to me your unwavering support of my ministry that I've brought into this church, I also want to make it clear to each of you that my dream for each and every one of you in this church that we share is that we continue to push outwards and forwards into a place of beloved community in which it isn't the person standing here, but rather the persons that are sitting out there, that are lifted up and affirmed as the ultimate hope of this church's future. And in a sense, are the very ones who are going to be the leaders that lead us into that future. You are all, in fact, the hope of our future. Just like the ancient disciples in the early church were Jesus' hope of a better future. You are all, in fact, the hope of our future. No one among us can deny it. American religion and contemporary spiritual communities are swimming against uncertain currents of transition and pushing into the headwinds of unknown change. And Fountain Street Church finds itself in the company of all of the churches around us who are navigating the sociological and anthropological history that is being written in our time. We've got a lot of big challenges ahead of us. And it won't be me that saves us from it. It won't be the governing board or a designated task force or even an ad hoc committee. Because the challenges that this church is going to be facing in the coming years, alongside every other religious and spiritual community in this nation, will not be resolved in the hands of a leader, but rather in the hearts of their communities. The challenges of our time will not be resolved in the hands of their leaders, but in the hearts of their communities. And this community has some damn good hearts to organize ourselves around to get that work done. So as we sunset the most unimaginable year that we could have shared together, with unimaginable amounts of transition and transformation that each of us have shared with one another, I want to leave you with just a little more good news this morning. The good news is that nobody's going to save us but ourselves. The good news is that no one person or board or team or committee is going to save us either. The good news is that authentic and sustaining transformation doesn't happen in the hands of one person, but in the hearts of a beloved community. The good news is that we are already actively building that very beloved community together. The good news is that this past year has been one of immense growth and strength and resolve and courage that many of us didn't even know we already had within ourselves or our church. The good news is that none of this was possible without those very virtues already resting and residing in the hearts and the spirits of every person that calls this church their home. The good news is that we know we have a litany of challenges facing us in the near, mid, and long-term future. And the very good news is that the hearts and minds of a true Fountain Streeter see those challenges as opportunities that we will navigate together in the spirit of our beloved community. Friends, the good news is that we have the tools of liberal religion and the tenacity of 154 years of ministry on our side. And the good news is that the only thing that stands between us and a future of collective flourishing and meaningful vitality is whether we're going to pick up those tools and lean into that tenacity together. So as we continue to move into the summer and ultimately an unknown future, may you know the power of love and justice and hope and possibility that already exists within each of you. May you not look up to the sky or a pulpit or any one leader to find those very strengths and virtues. And may you know that you are already enough as you are in the power of beloved community to make this reality so. So may it be so. Happy Ascension Day. Friends, we have a rich tradition here in which the offering becomes part of the collective whole beyond the walls of this church. 50% of it stays here to contribute to the legacy ministries that we keep building and rebuilding and moving forward into our future, but 50% of it goes directly beyond these walls into the hands and the embrace and the hearts of organizations that can do so much more than we can with those gifts. So in the spirit of love and collective flourishing and liberation for all, the offering will now most graciously be received. Friends, before we go today, we have a few announcements and a moment of gratitude. One of the biggest announcements I want to draw back to your attention, if you didn't see the news this week, is that the church office will be closed this week from Monday to Friday. That isn't to say that you can't still reach out to the staff. Specifically, if you have any pastoral needs, I will still be available. But a lot of our operational administrative staff are going to be doing some major shifts this week that will contribute to the consistency and the sustainability of everything we do administratively, financially, operationally. So it's an exciting week, but it's also a big, heavy lifting week for our staff. And so we want to support them. We want to thank them for this huge week ahead and offer them that space to do that and not get interrupted, because trust me, you don't want them interrupted as they're working on such sensitive, important information. So thank you for that, for the space that you're giving them. Additionally, this is the last 11 o'clock service in the sanctuary for the summer, but we will stay in the sanctuary for another month. I think I said earlier that it's a bit idiosyncratic this year. So starting next week, Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day weekend, we will move to one service at 10 o'clock, Memorial Day to Labor Day. But for the next 4 weeks, we're still going to be in here. Next week, Margie Peterson will be preaching and leading a service. The following week, which is the 1st of June, we're going to be having a Pride celebration service with many special things planned for that service. The week after that, on June 11th, we're actually having a music-themed service, which I've always wanted to do, and it's already gotten out of control, so it should be good. And the week after that, we have Dr. Kelly Christopher coming for a Juneteenth celebration and also talking about STEM programs in Grand Rapids, particularly in Grand Rapids Public Schools, as a tool for abolition in our times in education. So that should be a wonderful service as well. So please continue to gather here, but we're going to do it at 10 when it's hopefully a little cooler and earlier for your summer Sundays. Additionally, I wanted to lift up a few notes of gratitude. I wanted to thank the people responsible from our choir for this unbelievable tableau. Can you please join me in thanking them for such a beautiful... I don't know why you can't do that every week. It would be wonderful. And they graciously included a mirror that I brought down for them. It's just another tangible way to see yourselves on the reflection of this church's ministry and, of course, this church's hope. Speaking of gratitude, there's so much gratitude to lift up. I never feel like there's enough time or I have enough space to do it. But on that theme of servant leadership, I recognize that my hope in this church and what I see in this church is indeed not only a collective of beloved community, but a collective of people who are also committed to servant leadership. And we have a very vibrant ministry today because we have so many people willing to take a piece of this church's hope and invest in it and also step aside when they need to. And so there are many people that I would like to thank as we look back at this year and look ahead. Will you please, congregation, help me in thanking the choir for the ways that they've led in worship in our church? Thank you. What a gift. We are blessed by the leadership of the choir, and of course, we are blessed by the leadership of our choir director, Austin McWilliams. Thank you, Austin. We are blessed by the gifts of our accompanist, and it's not to say that we don't love your chaplain work, but let's stay on topic here. Our accompanist, Margie Peterson. Thank you. Thank you. We have had a rich year of music, friends. I also want to make sure that we thank anybody else who has contributed to the music here. If you'll remember, the first half of the year, we had organist Jonathan Took with us, and it was wonderful, so we thank him richly for his gifts, as well as Joe DeWinkle, who coincidentally will be back with us in June a little bit, as well as let's thank Phil for his gifts of music. Thank you, Phil. I also recognize that these services are not always consistent, they're different, and a big part of our ministry that reaches 500 to 700 people a week is the online platform of YouTube, which many of us may not watch unless we go back and revisit it, but that is a huge, huge part of extending our mission and our radical inclusion to the world. So thank you to our entire tech staff and volunteers who make that so. One of those invisible, unspoken aspects of our church that many of us also don't interface with is our children's programs. The other hope of the future, the youngest among us, also the most vulnerable among us. And there is an entire team of people, including the interim leadership of Katie Bush, who make that possible Sunday after Sunday, who provide a place for children to learn uninhibitedly without the confines of orthodoxy or pragmatism. And we are grateful for everyone who makes that space available to anybody beyond these walls. And so So a huge thank you to everyone in that program. And I don't think she knew I was going to do this, but Katie Bush is sitting in the balcony joining us. So thank you, Katie Bush. You don't know this, but she'll often join us up there during the program. Oh, goodness. This building is such a magical treasure. It takes a tremendous amount of energy and capacity to keep this treasure for us. It doesn't just stay pristine. We have a dedicated and loyal staff of custodians, Shannon Stiles and Darius, and most importantly, someone who dearly loves this building and even jokes that he says goodnight to it every night when he leaves, Jamie McDaniels. Thank you so much. Goodness. Now you're onto that point where I've done enough that I'm going to start leaving people out. So I do want to lift up every person who's been a volunteer or supported a team or a board or a committee. It's not to say that they won't be part of helping us into our collective future, but they're not going to save us. And so we do thank every one of those people for that. So thank you to everyone. And we'll still be here for another month in the sanctuary, so I'll come up with more gratitude. But for today, it felt very pertinent that we lifted those things up. I also want to lift up that we have a special guide for you, or summer program guide, we'll call it, made by Natalie Beversluis from the Religious Services Committee, and that details all of the speakers that we have to look forward to this summer. That begins June 25th, and we'll go through Labor Day. So those are available. I've seen them in the chapel, I've seen them in the lobby, and I know they're in the narthex. And a huge thank you to the Religious Services Committee who put this final summer series together. That would be Carol Koistra. We'll do each. Carol Koistra, thank you. Dick Wood, he's somewhere around here, thank you, Dick. And Heather Palmer, thank you. To all three of those individuals, a lot of work goes in behind the scenes of corralling and continuing to keep up with our speakers and coaching them and just making the entire summer move seamlessly. It's a huge weight off of the staff's shoulders, and it's also a huge burden for those who have to kind of make sure that they're on top of everything, so thank you. Your blessing for today. Your blessing for today is inspired by a little mantra from Dr. Littlefair. Many congregants have come to me in the last few weeks and said, Duncan Littlefair used to refer to himself as the lightning rod of West Michigan. Maybe that's what you're experiencing. The lightning rod of West Michigan, and conversely, I would say that Fountain Street Church is also sometimes a lightning rod for that kind of attention. And at first I rejected it. I thought, well, that's a horrible way to look at leadership or what. And in the last few days, I've come to embrace it. And so I want it to be part of our blessing if I can work this. Many of you know I'm usually pretty bad at metaphors. But a lightning rod doesn't just attract energy or attention. It's not just to be the highest point and get struck so that nothing else has to. The way the lightning rod works is that there's an infrastructure involved, a network of wiring that diffuses the energy, that carries it back into the earth. Some creative places in Europe even have ways in which they harness the energy brought forth from the lightning rod that goes through the network. And so if we look at it that way, I'm more than happy to be a lightning rod with all of you, and I think our church should be more than honored to be a lightning rod for not only liberal religion, but for love and justice in our world. If we agree that what we're really doing here is weaving together a network that harnesses that energy for good. Even hatred has energy, even darkness has energy, even evil has energy. It's what we choose to do with it when we receive it that will be the ultimate test of our vitality. And so in that light, I joined Dr. Littlefair and Rankin and Wooden and anyone else who stood in this pulpit or shepherded this wonderful ministry in being not only a happy heretic, but a happy lightning rod as a part, it's really meant to be sentimental, as a part of being in community and in network of energy harnessers. Go forth until we see one another again as part of a network of beloved community. Go forth knowing your worth and your power and your potential. Have a good one.
Lord, give